I have a theory about the internet that any personality or movement that has success will inevitably be brought down by their own egos. Think about the sheer changes in content over the years, with people who were once very successful only a few years ago to become totally irrelevant today. Don't get me wrong, there are other contributing factors. The change in demographics, the content is no longer timely. The simple fact is people will stop watching for hundreds of reasons. But no matter the factor, there is one consistent theme in each of these people's fall, and that is their ego. Their overinflated self-importance simply because they make videos on the internet. That their success is permanent or intrinsic to their own self-worth, and not because they simply got lucky. They become deluded, and as time goes on, their ego becomes destructive. Every story on the internet ends with an ego. There are no exceptions. And there are hundreds of examples of this. But our story today is about one of the internet's first.
Good news, everyone! Atheists own the internet! We've won! Go check out reddit.com or dig.com or stumbleupon.com or hell, any of them, it doesn't matter. And you'll see for yourself that the religious are fodder for our amusement. They've become the laughing stocks of the internet, where their gullibility and hypocrisy is pointed out in meme after meme after meme.
Things have changed now, haven't they? There was a time, from 2006 to 2013, when internet atheism was all the rage. You couldn't use the net without seeing their memes, arguments, or their eccentric personalities. They shoved it into everyone's faces, to obnoxious levels. They genuinely thought that they would take over the world and completely eradicate religion in the West. Millions of hours worth of content by the so-called new atheists, completely dedicated to making fun of the religious, and they were successful. But in 2019, the tables have long since turned, and now they've been hounded off the internet, mocked as they once mocked others, as nothing more than fedora tippers full of bluster but no substance. There's a certain irony to that, because all stories on the internet end with an ego, and this was the case for internet atheism. All internet movements failed to some degree, but very few were as spectacular as the smug, angry individuals of new atheism. How did this happen? What changed? Where are they now? That is what this video is about. The 2000s were characterized by one single major event. September 11th, 2001, when a group of Islamic jihadists took 4 planes and crashed them into various landmarks, but most famously, the Twin Towers in New York City. I can to this day remember exactly where I was when this happened, and so could most of the planet. It was just that significant of an event. People were scared. The tragedy, the loss of life, the senselessness of it. It was incredibly difficult to comprehend. The jihadists had a multitude of different reasons why they did this, but many people, including the soon-to-be-formed new atheists, focused on their religious motivation, that Islam as an ideology was the cause of them doing the absolutely insane action of flying a plane into a populated building. As both a direct and indirect consequence of this attack, the Americans engaged in 2 wars in the Middle East. The then President George W. Bush, a devout Christian, consistently used religious language in describing the enemy and the conflict between them. He would often use the word crusade.
When he returned to the White House, he spoke to the media.
This crusade, this war on terrorism, is going to take a while.
A religiously and politically loaded term in describing the impending wars. This gave the overall impression that this was some sort of bizarro religious conflict, that this was a war between Christianity and Islam, even though it was infinitely more complicated. The reason why I bring up this depressing history is because it's essential to understand the internet atheist motivation, because this is the world they perceived to be living in, and their formation was a direct response to it. A world where religious nuts would crash their planes into the buildings, and hyper-devout leaders will start wars based on the flimsiest of evidence, beyond their belief that it was divinely inspired, that religion was a dominant force of public life and oppressed their right to not believe, that religion was the main reason why the tragedies of 9/11 and the upcoming Iraq and Afghani war came to fruition. There was now a market for young people who were, rightfully, pissed, consistently blaming religion as the cause of this strife, not geopolitics or failures in diplomacy. Religion. The kindling was there. Now all it needed was a spark, a leader. That spark was Professor Richard Dawkins' book, The God Delusion, published in 2006, where he more or less says, in no uncertain terms, that God is not real, that believing it is akin to a mental illness, that religion is the cause of most problems in the world, and that religion must be fought, challenged, and argued against at every possible sphere of life. Public or private, doesn't matter. That science, reason, and logic is the only basis to judge our decisions. Other well-known people like Christopher Hitchens and Sam Harris would flock to Dawkins' banner, and they would start a movement that was called the New Atheists. New Atheism is characterized differently from regular atheism because of their militancy against religion. The converts would have near fanatical devotion to Dawkins, Hitchens, and Harris as the paragons of reason, science, and logic. These new faithful would use the internet to convey their simplistic worldview, and it was like wildfire. It just spread. In 2007, people started posting new atheist content in droves, specifically on what was then new websites, such as Reddit and YouTube. And there's a lot of things that are striking about it. For one, average people from all walks of life now had a platform and could join in on the atheist gold rush. You did not need to pay for ad space on your local TV or newspaper. In any other era, this would not have been possible. The only requirement was a camera and a computer to join in. This may sound pretty tame in 2019, but in 2007, this was still quite a novelty. The other major thing that is striking is the poor quality. YouTube was only 2 years old at this time, so it's logical that this would be the case, but it's still quite striking. It's pretty obvious that none of the atheist YouTubers anticipated the sheer amount of his success some of their personalities would have. YouTubers calling themselves Amazing Atheists and Thunderfoot, amongst hundreds of others, were all of a sudden raking in hundreds of thousands of views, sometimes even millions. Most of the content at this time focused on tackling the creationist point of view, people who take the Bible story of creation literally, and how science can show us how this interpretation is false. The most notable figure opposing them in these early years would be a young 20-something YouTuber, creationist, named Venom Fang X. Venom Fang X, to put it mildly, was a little bit loopy.
Guys want to see a magic trick? I'm going to make an atheist disappear.
If you had to make a guess on his personality based on just his early content, I would go as far to say he was unstable. He's every possible negative stereotype of an American Bible thumper stuck in a smug 20-year-old body, unbelievably arrogant, self-righteous, and completely prepared to force others to conform to his Protestant Christian beliefs. Venom Fang X embodied all new atheist fears and contempt into one person, as someone who put God before all things, including science, reason, and logic. It was this conflict between Venom and the atheists that drove initial internet interest into atheism. Venom would post rants about the Bible, and a YouTuber like Thunderfoot would post a debunking video.
This planet is covered 3/4 in water. If the planet flooded like the Bible says, the Grand Canyon could have been formed in about 5 minutes.
This is a geographical map of the United States. This is the Grand Canyon. The Grand Canyon is about 300 miles long. In order to travel from one end of the canyon to the other in 5 minutes, it is required that you would be traveling at about 5 to 6 times the speed of sound.
It was entertaining, like an internet soap opera with a whole cast of characters to take part in the pile-on. Venom's unbelievable arrogance covered up the atheists' own flaws as people. As such, they could frame themselves as good, honorable men and women from atheism, while Venom embodied the opposite of that. They found a monster to project upon. The conflict between internet atheism and Venom Fang X would rage throughout 2007, all the way to 2008, with Venom growing more and more unhinged as time progressed. Venom handled the criticism he was receiving extremely poorly, killing comments and ratings on his YouTube channel, which of course only caused more criticism and mocking. Venom crossed a line when he started taking down critical videos using a DMCA, despite the fact he did not own the copyright. This enraged the internet public, religious and non-religious alike, because because it was censorship, and the Streisand effect is real, bringing only more eyes to this unfolding saga. The great irony being is that Venom intended to destroy atheism at its source, but his actions ensured its spectacular growth. Thunderfoot, one of the atheist YouTubers, began legal action against Venom. Mr. Venom Fang X was now in serious trouble, because he had no legal leg to stand on, and was forced to arbitration with the help of his father. He was also forced to apologize in a YouTube video that Thunderfoot still has on his channel, almost like a trophy.
This is an apology from myself to Thunderfoot and other YouTube users. I confirm that the contents of this apology are true and accurate. My username on YouTube is VenomFangX. As many of you may know, there has been a dispute between Thunderfoot and myself over the past few weeks.
In the view of the New Atheist, they had a major internet victory. Both during and after this silly saga meant the atheists had a moral high ground, and people were unwilling to challenge them, especially if it meant a humiliating mea culpa that VenomFangX endured. The atheists would move on from target to target, newspaper article to newspaper article, looking for content in which to further push forth their worldview. Typically, it would contain insane religious overreach, such as teaching creationism in schools, while using this example as a way to frame all religion as poison. If you were a moderate Christian on the internet, you could be guaranteed that you would get a response video denigrating your beliefs. If you've ever had the misfortune of seeing a debate between an internet atheist and someone else, almost every conversation gets bogged down into what the word atheist actually means.
One thing that comes up consistently in casual conversations, debates, and even here in my short time on YouTube is the definition of atheism. Atheism is non-belief in the existence of a deity. It doesn't make assertions, and it doesn't in any way address knowledge. Non-belief is the default position until the burden of proof is met.
You see, the New Atheist quite successfully redefined the word atheist. Check dictionaries before 2006, and the original definition is clear, that an atheist is someone who disbelieves in God. It was defined by its opposition to theism, or believing in God. Think of it like a car's gear stick. If drive position is the believing in God point of view, then logically the reverse would be the atheism point of view. The rejection of God, rejection of the belief, disbelieving. They are oppositional viewpoints making oppositional claims. The problem with this is that it means the atheists would be making claims just as unfounded in the scientific method as the most hardcore creationist. So instead of trying to answer this difficult question with philosophy and effort, they did something incredibly lazy. They redefined the word atheism to mean simply a lack of belief, that anything outside the scientific method has no basis for a position. That instead of drive or reverse, they are in the neutral position of a car's gears. Not for or against, not going anywhere, just no opinion. Therefore, no need to justify said opinion, because there is none. This lack of belief is repeated constantly.
All it means is I lack belief in a deity, gods.
In fact, atheism is the opposite of faith. Faith means belief without evidence, and atheism is a lack of belief in gods.
So what is the difference between atheism and agnosticism, and ultimately, does it even really matter?
Atheism can't be a religion, because religion is believing something on insufficient evidence, whereas atheism is not believing stuff without sufficient evidence to believe in things. So the thing is, atheism is rational.
What do you think about what he just said there? Does that make much sense to you?
This looks like the typical YouTube buffoon steamroll debate.
So first of all, he mischaracterizes God and defines God as a magical sky wizard so that he can then strawman the concept of God.
Right, it's an autobiographical comment about one's personal psychology that I lack a belief in God. It's not a view. It's not something that is either true or false. It's just the absence of this particular belief. But that says absolutely nothing about the truth or falsity of the proposition that God exists.
Boy, I tell you, I cannot get a lot of people to see that, though. They are really hanging on to this definition.
You know why, I think, Kevin? I think they hang on to this because it excuses them from engaging in the intellectual hard work of trying to justify their position. They don't have to offer then any justification for what they believe. They just say, well, I lack this belief. And it's really intellectual laziness.
Video after video after video is atheists pushing forth this new definition to the point where most of the internet has accepted it. I mean, how can you argue with someone who will not even make the effort of putting forth a worldview? And it's clearly not something that the average atheist has thought through. They don't seem to realize that simply stating such a statement has profound philosophical implications. Rejecting or withholding belief in God because its lack of proof in the scientific method, while in the same breath claiming that reason and logic exist. Logic and reason are metaphysical concepts that exist outside of the scientific method. There are other standards of proof outside what can be done in a lab. For example, testimony in court. My points can easily be rebutted, but what I'm trying to explain, most of the debates of this time period never even got close to answering these interesting concepts. Most conversations were endlessly stuck on what the word atheism meant. The old definition describing disbelief, and the new definition which described a lack of belief. No one learned anything. No arguments were put forward. It was the same conversation over and over again. An argument endlessly stuck on the point of who has the burden of proof. As a result, the new atheist culture was completely stagnant. For a while, it was enough for the audience, for these YouTubers to espouse the same thing over and over again. But even the most hardened atheists could see this circle jerk had a self-life. This problem was reflected in their leaders. Dawkins, Harris, and Hitchens are impressive public speakers, but they often performed poorly in structured debates. There are quite a few examples of this, but it's most notable in their debates with William Lane Craig, a Christian philosopher and phenomenal debater.
The one Christian apologist who seems to have put the fear of God into many of my fellow atheists.
In the early 2010s, Harris and Hitchens had debates against Mr. Craig, and in terms of debating skill, they were completely outclassed by the Christian. I can't stress enough how crushing these defeats were, especially in the case of Hitchens. I'm not saying Mr. Craig was ultimately right in his belief. What I'm saying in terms of the debate, Craig was the clear winner, and it was almost exclusively due to his remarkable skill as a debater. The man clearly spends hundreds, perhaps even thousands of hours to prepare. Richard Dawkins was obviously spooked by his performance, and he avoided debating Craig on every possible occasion. As criticism mounted, he would even write an op-ed explaining why he wouldn't debate him, where his less savory personality traits would show. It became apparent the man had a destructive ego. Dawkins writes, "Don't feel embarrassed if you've never heard of William Lane Craig. He parades himself as a philosopher, but none of the professors of philosophy whom I consulted had heard of his name either." You may not like Craig, you may think he is wrong, but his credentials as a philosopher speaks for itself. Professional philosophers would have been aware of who he was, and Richard Dawkins was well aware of who Mr. Craig was. I don't know why he would lie about something so petty. It was documented that they spoke directly to each other, and it's clear that Dawkins was very much invested in this potential threat. A journalist would describe an unconscious physical reaction Dawkins had by the mere mention of his name. You don't behave in such a way when someone does not matter. In the same opinion piece, claimed Craig was a supporter of genocide. And it's a claim I find impossible to take seriously. It was simply a character assassination to avoid the growing calls for a debate. It was pathetic, and it certainly damaged the image of Dawkins as an untouchable intellectual. Dawkins drones on endlessly about the value of arguments and reason, not character assassinations and emotion, which he violates as soon as there was an opponent worth debating. In the end, the only debate they had was one where Dawkins had significant backup, with two other speakers. At the time, Dawkins clearly stated to Mr. Craig's face, no less, that he did not believe the backup debate was even a debate.
So as he got near to me, I stuck out my hand and I said, "Hello, I'm Bill Craig. Pleased to meet you," and introduced myself, and we shook hands. And then I said, "I'm surprised to find that you're on the panel for the debate." And he said, "And why not?" And I said, "Well, because you've always refused to debate me in the past." And all of a sudden, his demeanor just completely changed. And he says, "I don't consider this to be a debate with you. The Mexicans invited me to participate, and I accepted." And he turned away. And I said, "Well, I hope we have a good discussion." And he said, I consider that very unlikely, and just walked off.
Just walked away, huh?
And I thought, oh my goodness, this is really going to be interesting.
This is a statement he would revert on in later years. The man is incredibly inconsistent. The air of a respected intellectual was punctured like a balloon, and there was no going back. As time went on, new atheists became more and more popular on the internet, but they had massive difficulty translating it into real-world success. This includes zero political success and change in the real world. While on the internet, they were kings, but outside of it, no one cared. Their internet personalities outside of Dawkins, Hitchens, and Harris perform shockingly poorly in the real world. A good example of this was a CNN report in 2013, which by pure happenstance had Mr. Craig. The YouTuber in question was The Amazing Atheist, and it was a panel discussion. The contrast is stark. Craig is in a perfectly tailored suit, and actually at the studio, showing he cared for the audience perception of him, caring how people would perceive him as a proselytizer of Christianity, while the Amazing Atheist is bearded in a crumpled collar shirt with his chest hair on display. He could not even make the effort to get on a plane and come to the studio. Throughout the interview, he has trouble looking directly into the camera, showing a somewhat meek personality, which contrasts with his internet persona. I think you're now getting a general sense of the major problem with these atheist talking heads. They don't care enough. They wanted to change the world for the better, yet they didn't even make the most basic efforts to improve their presentation. Hundreds upon hundreds of videos talking about how smart they are and certainty in what they are saying, but presented with an opportunity to pony up, they bungle it completely. But we do learn a couple of things through interviews like this. One is the weird sensitivity about atheists being part of the minority. They're clearly sensitive to the fact that people are not going over to their, quote, lack of belief as fast as they expected. To them, it wasn't because their arguments were substandard or their presentation was abysmal, but the result of American Christian oppression, that atheists are afraid to come out, like gay people in the Reagan era.
About that. And our position is that the churches are filled with atheists. Our position is that the churches are filled with people who know it's a myth, who know it's a
why do
scam.
they go to church?
We don't know. Well,
you don't know.
Quite
you don't know why it is.
Bill, the whole point is that there's a lot of familial and social pressure keeping people into church. But
some of them have an incredibly intense persecution complex, where they perceive themselves as second-class citizens.
And then it dawned on me. Atheists are the new niggers. They are treating us exactly the way they used to treat black people. In fact, when you see these white cracker Christian politicians, you can almost tell that they want to call us niggers. They want to be like, you niggers can't run for office, you don't believe in God, you don't believe in nothing. You niggers need to stay away from us. Y'all ain't from around here, are you, boys? And that's exactly what I feel like living in Mississippi. It really does affect my life. So I say, if they're going to treat us like niggers, let's just steal the word and start calling ourselves that. I think every atheist in America should start referring to themselves as niggers.
Most of the new atheists were white middle to upper class males and females from English-speaking countries. The whole concept that they could be oppressed by the rural Bible Belt is socio-economically and geographically absurd. America, Australia, and the UK are flawed places, but I find it hard to believe that people would lynch a bunch of atheists because they make YouTube videos. No one in the real world cared. 2011 was probably the year atheism started to decline. This wasn't obvious at the time because new personalities started to appear to get in on the atheist gold rush. But the writing was on the wall. The new atheists were binded by one thing: their opposition to organized religion. Beyond that, their political opinions varied wildly, from hard right to hard left, to every position in between. Libertarians, communists, you name it, they had them. At first, this was an undeniable advantage because people took notice of their numbers. But as time went on, and people started having opinions that were incompatible between members, the situation just got more unstable with every new member that joined. By 2011, they had reached that critical mass, and the event that started the long, painful death of internet atheism happened. It would be dubbed Elevator Gate. It began when a young YouTuber named Rebecca Watson, an avowed feminist atheist, made a video describing her experience in an atheist convention.
Hello everyone. I missed you. I hope you missed me. It's been a while. I've been busy.
It's agonizing to watch, because who does not want to hear about a panel called Women Atheist Activists? But there is one moment that caught the internet's attention. In the video, she describes how a young man propositioned her in an elevator at 4 a.m. in the morning. She talks about how uncomfortable she was, and that men, directed at the audience, should not do that.
So I walked to the elevator, and a man got on the elevator with me and said, "Don't take this the wrong way, but I find you very interesting and I would like to talk more. Would you like to come to my hotel room for coffee?" Just a word to the wise here, guys, don't do that.
She would then tie this experience to a cultural sexism in the atheism movement.
Paula Kirby doesn't have a problem with sexism in the atheist community, and because of that, she assumes that there is no sexism. So I thought that I would, during my panel, discuss what it's like to communicate atheism as me, as a woman, but from a different perspective from Paula.
Initial argument within the atheist community was whether or not this man had the right to proposition Rebecca. This argument became nothing short of a screaming match about feminism invading and co-opting atheism. As the discussion rolled on to months and then years, it became painfully apparent that the new atheists really don't agree on anything. Healthcare, politics, economic policy, they could not agree. They couldn't even agree on what a man should do when he fancies a young woman. So began the atheist civil war. Going on to this day, new atheism would be split nearly right down the middle into two coalitions. One group would be the popular YouTubers, whose power was derived from their channels. The second group would be the feminists, whose power and influence was derived from control over real-world infrastructure, like conferences, organizations, and strategic websites. Why did this happen? Why did such a boring video go viral? There are a couple of reasons, but the most important has to do with morality. You see, the new atheists believe morality is more or less innate within a person. They believe that we automatically know what is moral. In his book, Dawkins argues that human morality comes from genes rather than collective cultural knowledge. For example, a new atheist would claim that as humans, we innately know not to murder a person, and there's no need for doctrine like the Ten Commandments or the Bible to come to that conclusion. The scientific method, while an incredibly useful construct for observing our universe, is completely inept in telling individuals how to live their life. By claiming that genes govern morality, then the whole Christian-Roman superstructure becomes irrelevant. They take for granted the Christian-Roman values as something inherent in all living people.
People who actually think that. A lot of people think that we need religion in order to be moral. There are a lot of people who think that if you took religion away, people would start, rushing around, smashing shop windows and robbing and raping and things like that. No evidence for that whatever. I mean, absolutely none. So I think one important thing we've got to do is to prize apart religion from morality. It's absolute nonsense.
That they take for granted the ethic that emerges out of that as if it's just a given, a rational given. You don't get it. The ethic that you think is normative is a consequence of its nesting inside this tremendously lengthy history, much of which was expressed in mythological formulation. You wipe that out. You don't get to keep all the presuppositions.
In many ways, new atheism is just Christianity in terms of how people behave.
This is why you have, on occasion in the past, described yourself as a cultural Christian.
I've described myself as a cultural Anglican, I would say. And I've also, I wrote an article called Atheists for Jesus. The point was that Jesus was a great moral teacher. And I was suggesting that somebody as intelligent as Jesus would have been an atheist if he had known what we know today.
But if Dawkins' theory was wrong, then there is no superstructure to hold up their morality, and the whole thing falls apart. Which is exactly what happened. Rebecca Watson is a feminist, and people in her camp tried to insert feminist theory as the superstructure blueprint to govern morality within atheism. Solving sexism, misogyny, and racism was now their cause. On the surface, that may sound great, but many people had good reason to be suspicious of their motivations. It's known to us to this day as the social justice warrior phenomenon that became popular in the mid-2010s. This is just an early example. I'm sure there was good intention, but the results were complete social and political isolation of anyone who opposed them. The YouTube atheists still adhered to the original values and wanted to maintain it without enroaching political doctrine. The two sides could not come to any compromise because they had no framework, no doctrine of understanding, and their altruistic genes were not working properly. The conflict became unbelievably hostile. Both sides treated the other like shit.
YouTube, it's been a while. I've missed you, and I'm guessing that you've missed me too, because I've heard that if a male atheist on YouTube goes too long without calling a woman a cunt, his balls will actually shrivel up and then tuck up inside of him, forming what some call a mangina. But anyway, I'm back because I want to tell you about this awesome fundraiser that we're doing at Skeptic. It's called Light the Night, and it's for the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society.
It escalated rapidly, with Dawkins pouring gasoline on the fire by making fun of Watson. He wrote this letter regarding his opinions on the man in the elevator. Dear Mussolina, stop whining, will you? Yes, I know you had your genitals mutilated with a razor blade. And yawn. Don't tell me yet again. I know you're not allowed to drive a car. You can't leave a house without a male relative, and your husband is allowed to beat you, and you stoned to death if you commit adultery. But stop whining, will you? Think of the suffering of your poor American sisters have to put up with. Only this week I heard one of them. She calls herself the Skeptic. You may agree with the sentiment of the letter, but in terms of PR, this was a complete disaster. The feminist atheists, in no uncertain terms, would claim Richard Dawkins as a misogynist, the atheist YouTubers as racists, and remove them from all existing real-world atheist infrastructure. While the YouTubers called the feminist atheists as censors trying to wipe out any opinion opposing their own, that the feminists were nothing more than whiny crybabies who were stealing the movement from within. The conflict would escalate as the feminists banned the YouTubers from their events and websites. It was like a political coup. The split between Thunderfoot and Free Thought blogs was especially bitter.
So a little after a week after joining Free Thought blogs, PZ Myers kicked me off. It seems that Free Thought really didn't extend as far as some minor political dissent on his views on feminism. Now, I know what a lot of you will be thinking. What, Free Thought blogs actually banned you? Are you kidding me? Isn't that just like take the biscuit in terms of conjuring up all those Orwellian misnomers like the Ministry of Truth and the Department of Love and the Free Thought blogs, where you've got absolute freedom to think as freely as you want, as long as those free thoughts actually agree with ours.
What's important about events like this is it shows communication between both sides had completely broken down. This is despite the fact that in the past they worked closely with each other. But now that link was broken. The isolation of the two communities extended not only to websites and the internet, but to real-life meetups. Richard Dawkins was all of a sudden persona non grata to the conventions he used to frequent.
Okay, you want to know how far the contamination has spread? This week, Richard Dawkins was disinvited from a science conference, while the Northeastern Conference on Science and Skepticism. Why? Because he had the temerity to retweet this parody of Big Red and Dawa Man.
Cause you are an Islamist and you are a feminist. We have so very much in common. I say Islamophobia, I say misogyny, I blame the Jewish media, and I blame the patriarchy.
Internet atheism was split, and it permanently crippled both sides' ability to push forward new strategy and their worldview. Any initiative a side would put forward to promote their worldview was doomed at the start because the other side would attack it. An example of this would be in 2012. The feminist atheists would launch an initiative called Atheism Plus. It was atheism plus the moral foundation of social justice and feminism.
We're going to be atheists plus we care about social justice. We're going to be atheists plus we support women's rights. We're going to be atheists plus we protest racism. Atheists plus we fight homophobia and transphobia. Atheists plus we use critical thinking and skepticism.
It was a massive flop because the YouTubers ruthlessly made fun of it, and because they dominated the YouTube space, they controlled the audience's first impression.
Yes, it does. Atheism Plus is our movement. We will not consider you part of it. We will not work with you. We will not befriend you. We will herefore denounce you as the irrational, immoral scum you are, if such you are. If you reject these values, then you are no longer one of us. And we will say so publicly and repeatedly. You are hereby disowned. Oh, frickin' A, Richard. Yeah, any totalitarian McCarthyist witch hunt would be proud of your unwavering commitment to unquestionable dogma. And then, of course, you show your real intentions when someone merely says, I'll stick with the original atheism, thanks. And you respond, so, one vote for douchery.
One of the feminist atheists, named Richard Carrier, welcomed the movement with a massaging of his own ego by stating that he was willing to provide, quote, intellectual artillery to the movement, and that was just another thing that was endlessly mocked.
Atheism Plus, stating, I will provide any intellectual artillery they need to expand this cause and make it successful.
Atheists Plus, we use critical thinking and skepticism.
Well, it's nice to see you didn't completely forget about critical thinking in that list.
To think it all began because of one man who had the audacity to proposition a young girl for sex in an elevator. While atheism was at war with itself, its enemies were sensing its weakness. You got to understand, new atheists throughout all this time were among the most smuggest, most self-righteous people you would ever meet. They couldn't understand that every person they made fun of, every time they bragged, every time they got into a fight, that meant one more person would join the ranks of people who wanted to see them get a black eye. Almost all their enemies were unnecessary, and it's human nature to strike back. And new atheists were just too damn arrogant to see the ditch that they were digging for themselves. That slowly, over the years, a critical mass of people was building up against them. All they needed was one mistake to unite them. That mistake happened on the 4th of January 2013. A Reddit user by the name of Alois posted an attempt for an inspirational quote he came up with describing the value of atheism. In this moment, I am euphoric, not because of some phony God's blessing, but because I'm enlightened by my intelligence. And like that, the spell was broken. The comment went viral on the internet as a funny but perfect encapsulation of the average internet's atheist's own delusions. They were ruthlessly mocked, and Alois, who was open to any and all criticism, deleted the post in shame. But at that stage, the damage was done. The atheists completely lost control of the conversation. While the internet was once a safe haven for them to espouse their beliefs, it was now a place where they got challenged on every possible occasion. And there's a certain irony to that they were treated as they treated so many others. They were laughed at, dismissed, bullied, and generally made into the internet joke for the next year. The symbol of the fedora, a hat that embodies pretension and phony intelligence, was co-opted and forced upon the internet atheists to this day, all because of one stupid quote. Atheism went from being the coolest thing on the internet to the lamest. View counts plummeted across the board, and the movement stalled. Each of the talking heads reacted to the crisis differently. Some, like Thunderfoot and the Amazing Atheists, saw the change in the winds and would trickle their atheist content and focus on more relevant topics, such as anti-feminism. Others would continue releasing atheist content as if it was still 2006, and their view counts suffered because of it. Christopher Hitchens, a key new atheist advocate, had long since died from cancer, while Richard Dawkins would continue to tarnish his image after an endless series of gaffes and embarrassing public appearances, where eventually he would restrict the conversation that would make him look bad.
I mean, I'd asked onto this show the world's most famous atheist, Richard Dawkins, superstar of atheism, which is the belief that there is no God. But then events, terrorist events, made him also take on Islam, which he called the greatest force for evil in the world today. So I wanted to talk to him about that kind of stuff. I invited him, he accepted, all good. Except 2 hours ago, less than, we started to get the first of a very long series of demands. Restrictions on what we could actually talk about. Don't portray him as a hero of the right, which I wasn't going to do, but whatever. Don't mention Islam specifically, Dawkins said. I shall not appear if Islam is mentioned specifically. He says Islam's the most dangerous religion, but I can't ask him about that. And then there's from the publicist. Dawkins also doesn't want to be asked why he doesn't want to be asked, why he doesn't want to distinguish between Christianity and Islam. Oh, this one was a good one. Oh, I must also not ask about Lawrence Krauss or the Me Too movement. Krauss happens to be the astrophysicist, another darling of the ABC, who pulled out of this same speaking tour with Dawkins after sexual harassment claims were made against him, claims that he denies, so I couldn't ask about that either. Then I got another threat. Oh, your promo mentioned Islam. I'm probably not going to come now. And I said, well, bugger off. Bugger off.
There is still a hardcore group that still follows Dawkins, but his influence in the public sphere has collapsed. The gold rush was over, so began the brutal decline of new atheism. New kings of YouTube, known as the skeptics, whose focus would be on the cultural war against feminism, a conflict that would spill into other communities, atheists and religious alike. That's where the interest lied post-2013. The skeptics contained many former internet atheists, but new atheism as a movement died that day. The dream of new atheism was ambitious, but it was doomed to fail. A dream of ridding the world of religion, replacing it with science, reason, and logic, unfulfilled. Why? Because of the people in it. Because they could not hold back their massive egos. They didn't realize that a political movement takes more work than making videos on YouTube. Too deluded into thinking that just because they shared a common interest to oppose religion, that they had enough in common to change the world. It was never really about reason or logic, but a group of YouTubers who were successful and mistaken that internet success as real world success. All they saw were their view counts going up and their like bars in the tens of thousands, thinking it meant real-world change. It was meaningless, but they used this validation as a reason to shove it into everyone's face, until the rest of the internet just said enough. Overnight, they were made into a laughingstock, as a stereotype of an angry, delusional neckbeard who thinks he knows more than everyone else. Now the whole thing is a heaping ruin, with few embers, but the movement is well and truly over. All internet stories end with an ego. There are no exceptions. The Fedora Lords of New Atheism were just one of the first.